from the Psych Hub Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Burnout Antidote, infusing well-being into healthcare culture. I'm Amy Pearlman.
Hey, Amy. Paul Deger here, too.
Hi, Paul. And this week's topic is around healthcare workplace culture, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We wanted to talk about this early on just because as we talk about moral distress or burnout, one of the things that seems to happen is it blames the individual. And we wanted to think about this within a context, within a culture, within a system. Right. So really think about culture as a driver of burnout and moral distress.
Yeah, when I start to think about, I'm big on words. I think we've established that. And like for culture, the metaphor of the how to boil a frog comes to mind. Do you know that one, Amy?
I didn't until we started talking about this and I had to look it up.
Oh, you did? Okay. And share what you found.
When you take a frog and you try to put it into boiling water, it jumps right out because the water is boiling and it's hot. But if you put a frog right into, the example actually said tepid water, and tepid is not a word I use in general conversation. But if you heat the water up ever so slightly, and ever so slowly, then you cook the frog without the frog jumping out. And I think that's a really great metaphor. I could see why you wanted to talk about that today once I looked it up.
So while you were looking up boiled frogs, I was looking up information on healthcare workplace culture. So I can share some of that. And I found this really cool study from the British Medical Journal from 2017. Because I wanted to wrap my head around, what are we talking about here with culture? And they found in one old study, 164 definitions of workplace culture. So this article set out to define it. And it gave a couple different types of definitions. And I think nothing too surprising, that it signifies how an organization, what are the beliefs, the assumptions, the attitudes, the behaviors. And what I really loved is it used this term about cognitive glue. So the culture is what binds people in a culture together. And then the other thing I really resonated with, it's the way people think around here and the way things are done around here. And I think that's kind of a rubber meets the road definition of culture that I really related to. Like you step into a hospital or a clinic and you quickly pick up how people think and do things around here. So how does that feel for a sort of context setting?
That makes a lot of sense to me. It reminds me of an employee satisfaction survey I took at one workplace where they said, do you have a best friend at work? And really cool. Used that as an indicator of people's satisfaction or really feeling like you were part of a community in the workplace.
Well, I feel like I'm coasting with my BFF here at work. So
I love it.
How about hearing a story from someone out there on the front lines about workplace culture?
Hello, my name is Elyssa, and I've been an ICU nurse for about 5 years now. And I'd like to start by thanking you all for including me to be a part of this podcast recording. And secondly, I want to add a disclaimer that all views are mine and mine only and are not representative of any healthcare facility that I've worked at or currently work at. Compassion fatigue is common in healthcare settings, especially in critical care settings, due to the constant exposure to stressful or overwhelming situations that healthcare workers come across. Working in the ICU can be very stressful. I'm often caring for some of the sickest patients in the hospital, and while I didn't become a nurse for the appreciation or recognition, when you're extending empathy to patients or their families and not feeling appreciated, it does lead to compassion fatigue at times, especially when patients or their family members are expressing their dissatisfaction with the care the patient is receiving or something else. Workplace culture is a huge thing for me. I was working at a hospital for 3.5 years that was only a 5-minute drive from my house, and I started dreading going to work. The issue was never with the patients. They were great and still are. I love what I do, and I love taking care of my patients and interacting with their families. It was the culture and attitude of those that I was working with that started to have an effect on me. It felt like everything, the negativity, the poor attitudes consumed the unit, and it started affecting me, and it made me question whether I even wanted to be a nurse anymore. I then realized I needed a change, and now I work at a hospital, still in the ICU, but with a completely different group of nurses. The nurses I now work with are always extending a helping hand, showing support, and come to work with positive attitudes. Changing my work environment seriously changed my life. I now commute an hour to work at a facility with supportive coworkers, and it has been the best decision I could have made professionally. Telling my story with my current coworkers and sharing how their open arms has been healing made me realize that I wasn't alone, and it also helped me encourage others that they don't have to stay somewhere if they're unhappy. Change is out there, and as cliche as it sounds, sometimes the grass is greener on the other side. I'm often telling new nurses that if they're unhappy with where they're at, they don't have to stay there. They can work at a facility where they will have support. They will have help, both with patients and mentally, emotionally, dealing with the stressful situations that we're often faced with. One of the biggest things for me is I gave up a 5-minute drive for an hour commute. And I did it because I'm happy, and I've stayed there for over a year now because I've never been this happy as a bedside nurse. And I encourage anyone out there who is struggling, who feels stuck, who feels like they're in a toxic work environment and they dread going to work. You don't have to stay stuck. You can change work environments. You can find a supportive group of coworkers who are going to help you grow personally and professionally. And I encourage everyone who feels that way to do that. Thank you again for having me and letting me share my experience.
I really think this comes to action as we hear people's experience and what this feels like out on the front lines. I think there was a lot that we could relate to in terms of kind of comparing different workplaces. And I know at this point in my career, it kind of helps to think about what did I like from this one and what did I think about another one. So trying to put this into our theme for today of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think Elyssa really helped us to think about what she had and where she went to get to a better outcome. So really taking the action, I want to applaud that, because a lot of times when we're feeling moral distress, taking action is one of the last things that we want to do. But she was able to take action to get what she needed and think about relationship or community, as we mentioned before, hearing her story, how that really means to be part of this, that work-life balance, the sense of humanity and understanding, and how that really contributes to better outcomes as a whole. So the research has also said this in terms of positive culture leads to not just the clinician feeling better. I think that clients or patients can really feel that from their clinicians as well.
It was so significant that she talked about being life-changing. And, I think about one of our themes for this whole series is about self-advocacy and self-care, and that she reached the point where I have to do this. And the sense of, she didn't use this term, but I want everyone to hear that you deserve to be happy and feel good at work. And therefore, there's not really a boundary. If you feel good at work, it's going to spill over at home too. And I heard her really exercising that right to be happy. Even if it means an hour drive, that I deserve to be happy at work and to feel supported and be around people that are willing to extend and help and support. That was really evident.
And I think that almost transitions into the bad to some extent too. But the bad feels like it is more than just an absence of the good.
Oh, good point.
I started to really think about the humanity of work. And we all spend enough time in the workplace that it's really so important to feel valued, and to feel needed and belonging. And when that is not integrated, when really the idea of output or productivity is forefront, and we all understand, especially in today's economic situation, what those mean in terms of importance and financial viability of companies, but really trying to think about, I had one workplace called this integration instead of balance, of how are you integrating your human self into the workplace and your home life. And that can have bad and good to it. So I think if there's too much integration and you don't have those boundaries between work and home, that kind of bleeding into each other can be really detrimental. But if you think about the absence of humanity in the workplace, we are really missing out.
Yeah, totally agree on that. And to bring back boiling a frog, I think the temperature starts to increase all the way back in our training, where it becomes the norm to put yourself last. And this sense of, I think healthcare environments tend to reward some unhealthy things sometime, like perfectionism, having to go it alone, having to be the person who fixes everything. And Tekla, our friend, I remember once talked about that doctors take an oath to put themselves last. And I'm sure all other healthcare professionals in some way do that. And that just it's not sustainable.
I agree. And I think it's almost the idea of self-care may make it to the list, but self-compassion is not integrated into the workplace.
Yeah, agree. That self-care, again, is that kind of extra burden as opposed to self-compassion is how I show up. All right, I think we've done the good, the bad. How about the ugly? Did we hear any ugly in this one?
I think there is this part when I think about the difference between the bad and the ugly, it gets to be a little bit of a fine line and a really easy one to cross over before you realize that it's there.
Yeah.
So it's almost too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think for me, when I was trying to, because I agree, I was trying to differentiate what's the difference. And to me, that thought of toxicity, like the bad may be tolerable, not good for you, but tolerable. But the ugly reaches a point of like she just decided, all right, enough. I've got to leave this environment. I think that's an indicator of ugly, and that we're dreading. I felt the weight that she was dreading going in to be exposed to the negativity. That feels like crossing that threshold to me.
I think that's a good point. And really thinking about whether it's almost the absence of the good. Maybe the absence of the good is the bad.
Okay.
And maybe the ugly is the presence of something that is more toxic. So it could just be not valuing the individual is in the bad category, and the ugly category may be something where it really devalues the individual in a way. Just playing around with the words here.
No, this is, I love talking this through because suddenly things make more sense, and maybe people can begin to have reference points. Like, when do I stay, and if I can try to help to change the system, or no, when is it crossed a line that it's best for me to get out?
Us healthcare clinicians are driven to heal and help others. At PsychHub, we offer a wide variety of content that can support your well-being, help you find new, creative, and evidence-based ways to practice, and get inspired again. Whether you want to better understand depression, or you're interested in providing trauma-informed care, or you want to learn about navigating grief, our vast library of educational content has you covered. PsychHub offers curated continuing education learning opportunities on a variety of timely and relevant mental health topics and evidence-based interventions, geared specifically toward healthcare and mental health providers. These custom learning programs will empower you to support better mental health for patients, colleagues, and yourself. Learn more about our evidence-based mental health education opportunities at psychhub.com.
And thinking about tolerance as a coping tool, I think a lot of healthcare folks are really good at tolerance because the environment itself, there's suffering that you're exposed to. So there is a certain amount of tolerance, I think, built up. But in toxicity, that is not sustainable. And I mean, eventually it will wear us down. So I think really the way you're defining these categories, I'm hoping is helpful to our listeners to begin to have reference points for where is this place at and where am I at relative to it?
It also reminds me of the conversation we had about workplace stress and burnout, and really what's the difference between the two. And what I started to think about it was kind of individual interaction with almost that sustained toxicity that really brings it into something that becomes more urgent to respond to. Would love to be thinking about intervening at the bad before intervening at the ugly. And the best case scenario would really be to build the good from the outset.
From the start. Yeah. Good point. So speaking of building the good, that article I mentioned earlier, that it had the data around that a culture better for your clinicians is going to be better for your patient outcomes. It talked about what is needed, what have been successful demonstrations of culture change. And talking about leaders, they said leaders need to focus, and I took it up a step, not just focus, but need to engage with the staff on things like values and equity and collaboration, cohesiveness, quality of life, and really promoting this idea of compassion. Because I think, to me, part of the ugly is ridiculing self-care and asking for help. And so I think healing is making it okay to speak up and say, hey, I need help over here. I'm drowning.
One of the things that I really spent my time thinking about as we were reviewing this content was this idea of not just giving space for self-compassion, but having leaders model self-compassion as well.
So powerful.
I thought about it in a few different ways, and this may be geeking out a little too much. So feel free to cut it if I get too deep. But I started thinking about it in terms of some evidence-based practices in the mental health space around behavior management training. And how we really work with parents to model what you want to see from your children. And that children don't have this innate ability to deal with feelings. I would also say that healthcare clinicians are not taught how to deal with this level of stress.
I would agree with that,
in the workplace. And the best intervention that I think for sustainable change is teaching this idea of self-compassion, but not just teaching it in an academic way or giving space for it, because even if you give space, people don't know how to do it. So really having leaders model that vulnerability, that humanness, acknowledging the struggles, acknowledging the suffering, and also acknowledging the reality of the work. And that to me felt like it pulled a lot in together
I like that.
of an action to take.
Well, I appreciate there's a skill building here that you're speaking to, that we're not necessarily taught this by our parents or in our professional training.
Right.
I just had a funny flashback. Way back in college, I was part of this group where we brought in the freshman students and helped orient them. And we had a camp to go away for a week. And it was like the most loving, compassionate experience I ever had. And one of the norms was called the standing O. At any time, if you felt tired or wrung out or just needed some appreciation, you could stand up on a table in the dining room. You didn't even have to speak. People knew that you needed support. Everyone would stand up and give you a round of applause. And it became known as doing a standing O. And I get chills when I think back to that experience. Like, there was such love and compassion that didn't even have to be really asked for beyond just standing up on a table. So, I don't know if that could be done in hospital settings. I think it'd be kind of cool. There may be some, regulations of JCO against that. But this idea of norms like that, where it becomes this collective support for any and all when they need it, to me would be a beautiful thing.
I love that. And I really love that you took this positive example of how to model it. When I started thinking about it, I started thinking about this idea of leaders who tell you that you have enough, that you have the freedom or the space to stop working when your shift is over, whether that's, 6 or 9 or 3. But then the leader themselves is responding to emails all hours of the day, or when you leave, you always see the person there. And so really there's this juxtaposition of do what I say and not what I do.
Back to modeling.
Right. It models that the expectation is to not have those boundaries, even though the words say that it's okay. So I think it's important to pay attention to what we say, but also what we do or how we are.
So Amy, I want to offer something to our listeners today on this topic. And I'm going to do a little channeling Tekla, our buddy from episode 1 about pause and reflect. Because we get so busy And that old later never happens. I'll get to this later, and it never happens. And so I want to invite our listeners to pause and reflect, maybe even talk to their peers at work about culture. And so here's a few prompts I want to toss out there. One is, what words describe your current workplace culture? Just keep it simple, just spitball a few words out there. And then pause, and then ask yourself, what would you like it to become? What words would you want to move towards? And then to make that transition, what do you need from four different entities? What do you need from leadership to make this shift happen? What do you need from your peers? What do you need from your family and friends? And maybe most importantly, what do you need to give yourself for this to be a possibility? And then what is one small actionable thing you can do to lean towards or step towards this future imagined state? This idea of the power, we know from psychology, the power of visioning something into existence. You got to start with, we've already talked, we're identifying where you're at, where do you want to get to? And maybe that can infuse some change.
And I think, Paul, those are really important questions. I think it's also helpful to take time and really think through an intention of what I think about it, instead of what do I want to be when I grow up? How do I want to be when I grow up?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
So almost this idea of kind of ties into the what do you need from yourself?
Yeah.
But thinking about how do I want to be, and what are all of the things that allow me or support me in being that person?
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
I also want to say it's not too late to ask these questions. When we first started planning for this episode, I started thinking about what are the questions I wish I had asked about culture when taking on a new job or a new position.
Yeah. What would you ask?
I think some of it is really around that modeling piece of who are the people I'm going to spend my time with, and what are their strengths? What are they working on? I also really want to acknowledge that good, bad, and ugly feel different to different people.
Yeah.
I'll give another example from a workplace where we had a meeting every Friday where people would come together, and I don't remember the real name of the meeting, but we did call the meeting the Friday Feels. And it was like the highlight of the week for so many people to come in, talk about shared successes, talk about struggles, and also this idea of kind of how do I bring this together to be the best me I can be at work. And other people really felt so uncomfortable in that setting, really felt like it got to something that was too personal, or felt like it was kind of a forced share. Things that feel forced aren't going to work. But I really think this idea of a menu and asking yourself these questions allow you to think through, who am I as a human being? What do I need in order to be the person I want to, the worker I want to be, but really focusing on the person I want to be at work?
You reminded me of Back and Coming Back Better, our previous podcast. We did an episode. I think you were on that episode about introversion and extroversion.
Yes.
And I could see where, this is not a one size fits all for creating a culture that is really inclusive. So I really appreciate you recognizing that this takes some consideration for how people may receive it, even if it seems like the best idea ever. It makes me think about, when it comes to culture, it is a collective. No one person owns it, and everyone can influence it. And, I guess my closing note for our listeners is what does it feels safe and comfortable to do today? And it could be as simple as modeling how to show up and what you would like to see in others, or maybe something bigger like initiating some change or speaking up to leadership. And so that it's what are you comfortable doing today is a just fine place to start.
I love that, Paul. And I think it does pull into this idea of a continuum of individuality,
Yeah.
but this idea that values that sense of, I wanted to say community again, or I wanted to say collective, but then I started thinking collection, and then I'm like, I'm too into the words here. But
Yeah.
this idea of people working together,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even in developing that culture, the working together can be modeling what this can look like.
Yeah, but I think we have a new trend or theme appearing around this is balancing individual and collective. And really, when it comes to moral distress for us healthcare folks, we need to work it from both ends. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next time around.
Bye, everyone. If you'd like to reach us, you can do so at podcast@psychhub.com. To be notified of new episodes, don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow wherever you're listening. And reviews are so helpful, so please do leave one if you can. It allows others to find us and to join along. The Burnout Antidote is executive produced and edited by Jacob Morrison. Research is assisted by Tekla Ross. Show artwork was created by Ornella Jangoli and Ashton Smith. A very special thanks to Juliana Castro, Elyssa Fackler, Trevin Stiegel, Andrea Womack, and of course, our pet, Pickles. The Burnout Antidote is a co-production from Psych Hub and is brought to you by Janssen Neuroscience.